Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours. I'm Shauna Robeson with Creating Space Coastal, and in this episode, we are going to be exploring embossing, debossing, ways to add texture to your projects, and a variety of techniques, including heat embossing, including embossing paste, and doing scoring. We're going to show some fun ways to make different projects out of all of these different techniques: embossing folders, die cuts, texture plates, punches, you name it, and even using a stencil as an embossing plate. So stay tuned if you want to get an introduction to a lot of different techniques of creating some dimension and texture in your paper projects. Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome to Healing Art Happy Hour. Tonight, we're going to be starting a new subject. We're going to be talking about embossing and also other things that can create dimension and texture in your work. There's a lot to cover. I'm going to talk about what embossing is versus debossing and how to create other textures. Let's get to it because there's lots to cover. The first thing that I want to talk about is heat embossing, because that's a nice segue from what we've done in the past, which was last month, all of the inking and stamping. So this is a good segue to heat embossing. Now, embossing basically just means that you're raising above the surface of, in this case, we're going to be talking about paper, but you're raising above the surface of whatever the project is. So if it's embossed, you're going to feel a texture. It's three-dimensional texture above the surface. Debossing is the opposite. That is, it's recessed below the surface, original surface of the paper. So we are going to talk about both of those. There are, of course, a lot more ways you can build up dimension on paper compared to reducing or recessing into the paper. But I will talk about both of those and show you examples. And today I'm just going to touch on all of the different ways. And then throughout the month, each week, we're going to do a deeper dive into the various techniques. And so I can show you some different special effects and things you can do with all of these techniques. This looks complicated. This is my heat emboss. And the only reason I'm showing you all of this, we're not going to need all of this, but this is how I store it. I have a cookie sheet, and you'll understand why I have all these things in a minute, but I have a cookie sheet, and then on top of it, because I'm a little bit overkill, I have one of those silicone baking sheets. So on top of it, and this is the work surface because we are going to be using heat and I want to protect my surface that I'm going to be working on. So that's what all this is. But all of my supplies, everything related to heat embossing, I can store right in this cookie sheet, and I just put it all together on the shelf. So I just wanted to show you that because that's an example of just a storing tip, I guess, if you will. Now, we don't need all of these. I obviously have more than, probably the average bear, and less than some people as far as my embossing supplies go. The minimal supplies, I'm going to talk about minimal supplies. What I would recommend is you need some embossing powder, and I would suggest a clear embossing powder. Like I said, if you're only going to have one. Now, this one says detail, and you'll notice that on some of the labels, and that just means it's a finer powder. So it's good for doing script and things that I have fine details. Some powders are a little bit thicker, and they're great for, bulkiness. But if you're trying to do your sentiments, you don't really want thick powder. You don't want, because then the letters will kind of clump together. So you'll need a heat embossing. And basically this is, I'm assuming it's probably an acrylic product. It's just a powder that melts to heat, and it'll adhere to your project. Now, this is an example of it finished, and I don't know if you can see, it's hard to pick up because it's basically just shiny, but all of those waves, all the white there is all embossing powder, and it's textured. So I can feel the three-dimensional texture of that. It's hard to pick up, of course, on on the video because it's white on white and it's washing itself out. But when I look at it from the side, it is shiny because this will melt and become shiny because it's basically plastic that's melted. That's what we're going to be doing. Now, how we do that is we're going to take some kind of binder. I'm going to just call it a binder to stick it on the paper. In this case, the minimal that I would have for that, if you're just going to have one thing, is a clear embossing ink. And basically what this is, it's the binder or the liquid part of a pigment ink, which has the glycerin in it. So it's kind of sticky and gummy, but it has no pigment in it. So even though the pad looks white, it's actually clear. So if you're going to have one thing that's related to embossing, I would say get the clear, this one's called watermark stamp. You also see them called embossing pad. Now this one has a little bit of a tint to it. I would say get it clear if you have a choice. And then the other thing that you must have is a heat tool. They usually look something like this. Now this one only has one heat setting. I have seen them with dual settings, and I would recommend if you're just getting one to look for one of those because I think it's a great idea. This one only has, super hot. That one has a cooler setting that you could use for also maybe drying your projects and things like that, where it's not going to, damage as much. This definitely is for heat. Now, some people ask if you can use a hair dryer, and the problem with the hair dryer is I don't think that it gets as hot. I'm pretty sure it doesn't, but there may be ones that out there that do get super hot, so I can't be sure about that. But what I am sure about is that hair dryers are designed to blow a lot of air more than the heat. And you don't want a ton of air. You need a little bit of air to move the heat, but you don't want it to be blowing too much because it'll blow this powder right off your project. And that's a problem because you need your powder to stay on there to melt on there. So this tool is designed specifically for this kind of thing. So I do recommend a heat tool. Now this one has a guard that's going to protect you from burning yourself because this metal part gets really hot. And that's also another feature that I would recommend if you're shopping for one, just because, sometimes when you get busy, it's easy to put your hand where you don't want it or you're not aware. So if you're going to have, the minimal products, I would say these would be what I would have. Now, the result of just having clear powder and clear embossing ink is that you can only really create a clear or watermarked embossing. And that'll work for some techniques, but it's nice to also have color. However, if you do any kind of stamping, you can always use your ink, your other inks for the color, and then do clear embossing over it. So you still can get the color. If I was going to add some more powders, the other colors that I would have minimally is probably the metallics, because those are really cool. And it's hard to, even with a metallic ink, stamping ink, they're not going to be as shiny as these will. They're not going to show up as nice as these will. So I do like the metallics in the powder. And then I also like the white, because even when I use a white ink on top of a colored cardstock, it's not always bright white. Sometimes it loses a little bit of the brightness to it. And so the white powder is going to give you extra white. I'm going to show you examples of all of these in just a second. And then I do also like having black. However, black is easy enough to do with black ink and clear. So this would be the last one I would choose of my main ones. And I would probably, if I was going to get everything I wanted, I would just get these ones. I would get black, white, gold, and silver, and if there's other metallics, and then clear. But I'd start with clear, white, and metallics, and then black. That's the order. You can also use pretty much most inks will work. However, the way it works is you put the ink on the paper, and then the ink creates a wetness that the powder sticks to. And all that that does is holds it there until you heat set it, until you melt it onto the paper. It's not really there to hold it onto the paper. Once you melt it, it's going to melt onto the paper, but you need it wet long enough for the powder to stick to it. So if you have fast drying inks, like the more the water-based, you have to either work very quickly or it's going to absorb into the paper and you're not going to have it moist at all. You could maybe double stamp it, use the color, and then do the clear over the top. And I'll be demonstrating all these in the future. But the pigment inks, and this is a white pigment ink. The pigment inks work better because they're glycerin based. They're sticky. They stay wet longer, and so those are great for embossing techniques. So if you're going to be doing embossing techniques and you're just buying ink for that, I would recommend pigment-based inks because they work the best as far as embossing goes. And they work great for other techniques as well. And even the permanent inks, like this is an oil-based, so it's sticky, but it does dry pretty quickly. So you can use it, just stamp and then quickly get the powder on. Now, let me just demonstrate what I mean, and then you'll understand what I'm talking about a little bit. I'm going to use my Misty tool that I showed last time because I want to be able to restamp it if it doesn't work out the first time around. And so this gives me that option. For those of you who are new, it's just a tool that helps in positioning. So what I'm going to do is I already have my stamp ready to go and I have my paper. So I'm going to choose whatever ink that I want to use. In this case, I'm going to just demonstrate with the color. And I'll do color with clear so you get an idea of what that looks like. And I have to work very quickly because I'm using a dye-based quick drying ink. So let me just show you some other things that I'm going to be using before I get to them, because I want you to understand what they are when they show up in this process. So I also have a container because the powder is a bit messy and I try to reuse it. So what I do is I use this cardstock and I reuse it all the time. It actually, the white that's on there is an anti-static powder, and I'm going to talk about that in a second too. But I use this all the time to catch all the extra powder, and then I can put it back in my container with this cardstock. The other thing I have here is this to either scoop up the powder, or else I can use this straw to kind of scoop up and do details as well. So I have those handy. And then for heating it, you can have this is a option of a tool to hold the project in place, just so you don't have to have your fingers. If it's something that's, that you want to have your fingers out of the heat zone, you can use that. So I have this handy as well in case I need it. The anti-static powder, they sell them just like this. I think it's just cornstarch in there. So if you don't have one of these, I do recommend having something, because static will make the powder stick where you don't want it. You can just use some cornstarch with a little, cotton cloth and just wipe it on there. Or I've even heard, and I haven't tried this, but I've heard that a used dryer sheet, since they're not a new one because it has too much of the chemical on it, but a used one is also supposed to be a good anti-static tool. So you could try that. So I'm going to first wipe down my paper with the anti-static tool. And that is going to, like I said, keep that powder from sticking to places I don't want it. Let's say I've been holding this paper and I have some fingerprints on there, so it also will cover any kind of oils or things like that and keep it from sticking, like I said, where you don't want it to stick. So I just covered my project with that. Then I'm going to have my clear detail powder ready to go, because I have to work quickly. And then I'm going to, my stamp's off to the side here, but I'm just getting the ink on the stamp. And because I can restamp it, if it doesn't work, I am just gonna try it out and see. I could do double stamp just to make sure that there's enough. Yeah, like see, there's a little area there that's not great. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do one more stamp. All right. Now, as soon as I lift this, I want to really get it quickly to the powder. I'm tapping off any of the powder that's not stuck to it. And I can already see that because the powder is kind of the powder is sort of white looking, and I can see that there are areas that did dry before I got this on there. So it's not a complete coverage, only because this ink absorbs very quickly. If you're concerned about the powder moving off of it, you can heat from the bottom, but it's going to be easier for me to show you heating from the top. And I also heat usually both sides because it will work the paper, the heat. So I usually do it, kind of mix it. So, but I want you guys to see the changes that happen when I heat it. I'm going to heat the tool first before I bring it to the paper, like warm it up. Okay. Now watch what happens. Hopefully it'll show up on camera. You'll notice that white starts to go away, and then it's going to get shiny. You probably can't see the shininess, but you can see that it gets darker where it has melted. Now, I don't want to really hold it too still on one area for very long. I'm going to heat the back of it too, just to reduce the warping of the paper. And I think that it wasn't a great coverage because of that ink drying so quickly. So in this case, what I can do, I mean, it's okay, but it's not the best coverage. I want a little bit more, but I want to get that. I want you guys to see the shine. Oh, you can see a little bit of that shine at this angle. Okay, so in this case, because I have it on the MISTI, I can try to, although I didn't really mark where this line this was. Normally, I'm not going to do it this time, because normally you would know exactly where your project is. I would have it in the corner usually, but I think I just had it lined up because I wasn't going to re-stamp it. But in this case, I didn't do that. So normally when I use this, I would have this in the corner, and that way I would know exactly where to reset this to restamp it. But in this case, I don't remember which line I had this on. So I could try to restamp it, but it's going to probably be off. So I'm not going to worry about it actually. But you can, if you don't like it, you can either in fact, I'll do it this way. This is another option. You can reheat this and then add the more powder to it. So what I'll do is try that and see if I can get a little bit more embossed powder to stick, because I don't feel like it's got a ton. And definitely more stuck to it. So I'm going to get a little thicker layer of embossing powder on it. So it's probably difficult to tell on the screen, but I definitely have a thicker, more dimensional look now that I've added, so you can see more of that shine. So this is a way that you can get color with just the clear by stamping with the colored ink and then using the clear embossing over it. I would recommend, however, like I said before, if you use the pigment ink, I didn't have a red pigment ink, but I thought red would show up nicely. But if you have a pigment ink, I recommend using that, and that's going to just give you more coverage. You're just going to get a better, juicier coverage with that. Now let me show you, because I think it's fun to see. I want to show you the white, and I also want to show you the metallic. If I were to stamp with this on black with the white pigment ink, it is going to show up. I'm going to do a side by side. So this is just white pigment ink, and I'm going to use the clear embossing powder again. And I want to just show you that compared to using the white embossing powder. Now, if you have some of the powder, it's easier to see on the black. There's a little bit of stray powder that I don't want on there. I forgot to rub this with the anti-static, and that's what you get when you don't use the anti-static. But I can just move those little granules of powder off that are where I don't want them. In this case, they're clear. They're not, doesn't matter too much. They are going to show up though, because they're glossy. So, but that's why it helps to use the anti-static. But even with the anti-static, you still can have some stray ones, and you just can use a little brush to brush the granules off. So you can see that, you can still see that there's white there, but they're kind of clear. They're not real bright white. And you can even see where maybe some of the ink didn't really stick as well. So if I do the same thing with using a clear embossing ink, but I use the white powder, let's see what kind of results I get in that case. I can actually leave this too, because it's not going to dry real quick. So if I wanted to stamp several at the same time, like in this case, I need to put this clear embossed powder away. So I can take a minute. I don't have to rush to it because it's not going to dry up right away. All right, so now I'm going to take some white powder. Now that looks white, but that's clear. And again, I forgot to do that anti-static. I do that a lot. That's why I know how to fix it even if I forget. Now see that part right there? That's because I was probably holding it with my thumb or my finger. And that's exactly why it's good to do that powder. I'm going to just tap it a little bit more. It's going to take off a lot of that, but I don't want that big fingerprint. So I'm just going to, like I said, just wipe it off. This is the challenge with using a pigmented powder, is especially on white paper with black or white on black paper, it's going to show up a lot more if you get it in places you don't want it. And there are other remedies too. I mean, you can use a little sanding eraser to, take off things. But now there's a lot of little white dust that's in there because I didn't use that anti-static, but I'm not really going to worry about it. But it'll be a good example of why it's nice to have the anti-static tool, especially for white on black. All right. I can also, once I get the powder on, I could let it sit if I wanted to heat them all at the same time. I was doing several at one time. This, like I said, this isn't going to dry as quickly, so that's going to be fine. All right, you can see how that's much brighter. And, you can't really notice too much the little extra crumbs in there, but unless you look close. So you can see a lot of little white speckles, and that wouldn't happen as much if you use the anti-static powder, but that's much more vibrant a look. And that's why I would say white is really nice to have, because you're going to get more vibrant white on a dark cardstock than with the white pigment ink. All right, the last one I want to show you, and I'll show you this on a craft color paper, just to be different, is one of the metallics. Now I'm going to stamp again with clear. You can mix, like you could try mixing a color with a metallic or something like that. It's pretty opaque, so it's probably not going to show through, but you know, you can experiment with that kind of thing. And you'll see how dull that looks. Again, I didn't use the powder, but I forget it a lot. Sometimes the air from the heat tool will blow off those little sprays. Look at that. Isn't that fun? So you can pretty much turn any project, any paper or anything into, you know, like metallic paper. So anyway, a lot of fun you can have with the heat embossing, and I'll show more. They don't only have the ink, that clear ink in a pad form, which is great for stamping. They also have it in a dauber. So you could use this through stencils or on stamps as well. And they also have a marker. So if you wanted to draw your own design, you could. It's basically just like a glycerin, maybe has some resin in there that you can write a sentiment yourself. This has two tips. It has a firm nib, and then it has a brush nib, which is actually pretty soft. I don't know if I care for this brush nib. It's a very soft soft nib, and it bends, you know, very easily. So I'm not sure about that. Okay, so that is the basics of heat embossing. It's, you know, it has a little futziness to it. It can be a little bit messy, but as long as you have your system set up, it has a great effect. It's hard to really get with any other type of product that's out there. And you can make some, I mean, just using those metallics for your sentiments just really adds an elegance to your project. Okay, the next one I want to just talk about, and we have talked about this before, but in a different context, but you'll see it just marketed differently. So you'll also find what's called embossing paste, and this is essentially an acrylic gel, just like we talked about. Now, I don't know if there's there's a different formula, but it says 100% acrylic emulsion, and it basically looks to me, and we're going to be playing around with this again, you know, in the coming weeks too, but looks to me just like an acrylic gel medium. And you can use this, mix it with, I'm going to actually be demonstrating through the month, mixing it with some mica powders and things like that to add color. You can also add ink colors to it. So we're going to be playing around with that this month as well. But you can also use, if you already have in your toolbox, flexible modeling paste. Be aware that some of these will dry clear and some of them dry white and you know, are not clear. Like this, I believe, dries white, the flexible modeling paste. This says right on the front, translucent. So this is going to dry clear, but you can even add things like some glitter. And like I said, all those different pigments. So you can play around with this and how you use it. And for those of you who've seen my other demonstrations of that already know, but maybe I'll just add a little something to it to make it interesting. Okay, so this you would primarily use through a stencil type thing. Now you can create your own stencils or whatever, but this is a great tool to, I mean, a great product to use with stencils. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I want to secure my stencil down a little bit. And I don't want any of these hearts, and they're pretty close to my circles. So I'm just going to mask off the ones that are close, and they'll also act as like holding it down a little bit. And I can use just an old credit card for this. That's all you have. You can use a palette knife, whatever you want to do. And just like you would do with anything called a texture paste, there's different names. This one's called embossing paste. There's also texture paste. You can even use paintable caulking if that's what you have in your toolbox. It's probably not going to be archival, but I think it would work fine. It's just that's a full size. Okay, so I'm going to take, now use the back side of it. It's kind of like, you know, kind of like frosting. I'm going to take a little bit, bring it out here. I'm going to put a little bit of this glitter in it for fun. I don't know how much I need, but I don't like to use glitter because it gets everywhere. But this is a great way to use it because it's going to basically, you're mixing it in with the paste. So it's going to hold it a little bit better, I think, than if you sprinkle it on top. Now you can certainly put it on and then sprinkle it on top if you want it to be all on top, but then it's going to come off a little bit easier. So I wanted to just see, I've never mixed this in before, but I'm going to see how that works. All right. So just like with any other texture paste and stencil, it's kind of like frosting a cake. You're just going to lay it on and then scrape it across so that the paste goes in the openings. And that's why I blocked those hearts there, because I didn't want it to go in those openings. And depending on how thick your stencil is, it's going to be the thickness of the embossing. So if you have a thicker plastics or, you know, thicker stencil, it's going to be a thicker texture. And if you have thinner ones, because they do make them in different thicknesses, so it's going to be different based on what your stencil is. You can even put a little extra so that it's, you know, on top so that it's higher, but I try to just make it pretty even. Okay, now, and you do have to clean it up right away, because just like any other acrylic medium, it is acrylic and it will dry hard and it'll stick to your stencil. So I recommend at least getting it in water or something pretty quickly so that it can start soaking. And now I've got some cool little snowballs or whatever. And once those dry, we're going to see, I can already see shimmer in there from that glitter. So that's going to be a cool effect. I think once it dries, it's just going to be real shimmery, and it's going to hold all that glitter in there. So I don't have to worry about it flying everywhere, because that's my biggest concern about using glitter. I'm just going to, this side one, the side dot's kind of hanging over. So I'm going to just take a little bit off there. Okay, now I'm putting that aside to dry. So those are both considered more the wet embossing. And, you know, there's a little bit of cleanup, especially anytime you use a liquid acrylic product. But there's a lot of fun things that we're going to be able to do with that as well. And I'll be showing more of those in the coming weeks. Okay, so the other ones that I have that I could use, if you have already, you could use a super heavy gesso. Now this definitely dries white. Oops, I have glitter on my, I still have glitter everywhere. Although at least it's a pretty color. Okay. So this is a super heavy gesso. So it is really thick, like gel consistency. It's going to dry white. So this would be something that I could maybe paint over or color over. I could put inks over the top of it. As opposed, and I could mix something in, but it's going to have the white, so it's going to make it a little bit more pastel. And then the flexible modeling paste I showed, and then I also have a gloss super heavy gel. So any of these heavy gels, the acrylic medium heavy gels, are going to work similar. There might be some different characteristics of this specifically that I'm not aware of. And so in the coming weeks, I'm going to do some side-by-side comparisons with the different ones and see how they work. So stay tuned for that. Another one that I will add to this collection is, and I use this as well, is this crackle paste. So this you could put over the top of a colored, or you can add some color to it. But I think it works better when you do it over the top of some color, and then you can either paint it, but it ends up being a little bit white. So we'll be playing around with this as well in the coming weeks. And those are just other things that you can add. I'm also going to try, we added the glitter, and I'm also going to try adding eyeshadow. This is like dollar store eyeshadow, mica powder, and also some other, like, I think this is the Pearl X, if I'm correct. But anyway, I'm going to add some mica powder and see how those work with it. And you can either mix it in, or you can put it on top of it, because it is an acrylic gel medium that is basically an adhesive. So we're going to play around with those coming soon. Now you'll also see on the market things that are designed to be dimensional accents. This is an example of liquid pearl. So this will dry with, it'll dry a little bit dimensional, and you can create little accents with those. So those are another options. And of course, there's the glitter, the stickles, the glitter glues that also have a little dimension to them. So those are some other ways you can add some dimension to your project. And that would be all of the different wet techniques. Now I'm going to talk about the more dry techniques. We see embossing and debossing in our lives every day. And I wanted to just show you guys, this is paper towels. So all of those, the quilting that people talk about, they talk about in advertising for toilet paper and paper towels, that's some emboss and deboss techniques in the paper. So you get these interesting textures. Well, that's the same thing like what we're going to be doing. They just do it in the milling process. Another thing that you might have seen or done is some leather work, where you imprint into leather. So that it would be the debossing. Now in this case, leather's thick, and so you're not seeing it's not sticking out the other side like on paper. But paper is going to be showing both sides. And then many of you might remember these. Remember these embossing label makers? Basically, that's how these are made. The plastic, when it's stretched, it's white inside, so the black basically breaks through, and you get the white that comes through from pushing through the back. So that is created with the emboss technique as well. So this is another thing you can do to add like a fun sentiment to your card by using one of these. They've kind of made a comeback in the crafting world. Hi, just a little reminder to please hit that subscribe, hit the like button. Don't forget to comment or look down in the notes below to find links to products. And let's get back to the program. Thanks. The next one, I'm going to start, I think, with the basics, things that you probably have around in your crafting tool box first. The first thing I'm going to talk about is a paper trimmer. And yes, paper trimmers trim paper, but also many of them also include an embossing tool or a scoring tool. So scoring, embossing, it's doing kind of the same thing. The difference between scoring and other types of embossing is it's just a straight line. And so this tool can go on here just like the blade, and you can get a straight embossed, a straight scored line. So let me just do an example of that. I use it quite a bit in card making to make my card bases. I cut down an 8.5 by 11, and then I'll go ahead and score it. Let me just take the blade part off. The one thing I don't like about this particular design is there's not room to park this. You can have both tools on it at the same time, but there's not room at the end to park it. So if you had a big piece of paper, you'd have to, they kind of get in the way of each other. So you have to really remove one in order to use the other one. So it's depending on how big of sheets of paper you're using, but there's a little area where you can remove the blades. So I'm just going to take the blade part off, and I'm going to stick the scoring tool. And I want to score this at 4 1/4 to make it in half, because this is 8.5 wide. So at 4 1/4, I can easily just run this tool across, and I'm going to run it one more time, and it's going to give me a scored line. See, it's embossed on this side and debossed on this side. And a lot of times people think that when you fold these, you're supposed to fold it towards the inside where it's debossed, where there's the groove. So you actually fold it towards the embossed side. So you get a nice full straight fold compared to trying to fold it manually. And the way this tool works is it has a smooth, it's just a little like loop of metal that's soft. It's not a blade or anything like that. You don't have a paper trimmer, let's say, that has this tool on it. You can kind of do it yourself. And how do you do that? So in this case, you can use a bone folder, or if you have one of those ball tools. I have a couple other things I'm going to try out too, but I don't think they would work necessarily with this, but I'm going to try both of these would work with this. So you have the groove there that acts as your guide, and you can, let's say I want to make the front of this have an embossed border. I can just say I want the border to be about 1/4 of an inch in. I can mark where I want it in there, and then I can just run. This will even help guide the tool. I can just run this bone folder along that line, and it's going to give me a nice embossed line. And I could just do that with each side. Let's see, this is 5 1/2. So I want to go to 5 1/4. Oops, I got to make sure I'm on the same side. I guess I'm going to have to do it over there because so it's over here. I can switch this around, do it that way. All right, so 5, and I want to have it near me so I can see where it is. All right, so I don't want it, I want it to go all the way to the end because I did the other one all the way to the end, and I want it to stop right over here at the end of this card front. So I'm just going to run my bone folder along and along. And now I have 2 sides of the border. Okay. Now I could keep using the bone folder, but I wanted to show you, you can also use the ball stylus. I would say use the bigger side because this, if it's too small, it wants to go in the groove, you can tear the paper. So you have to be careful about that. That's the only thing about using this type of device. And this just adds a nice polished border around this card. And it's very simple. So any of those tools and any cutting board, as long as it has that little groove, you can use that as your guide and you can get some nice straight lines. Now, you can also use it to create other effects as well. All right, I'm going to use the ball and I can go, I'm just going to mark it every, let's just do every 1/4 inch. Okay, so you can do many patterns and then you can even do cross patterns. I want them going the same, I want them going the same side. You can even alternate. You can have one line is emboss, one line's deboss. You know, you can mix it up. So then you can start getting a checkered pattern. And you can either use the deboss side or the emboss side. There's always going to be an alternate. Then you can make things like an ice cream cone or a cozy for a cup of coffee, or I don't know, some shingles that are snowy on the top of a home or something like that, gingerbread cookies. So the thing is even though you have just this one tool, you can do quite a bit of things with it. We're going to be playing around with different things you can do to make it a little bit easier. They have these scoreboards, which are designed specifically for scoring. There's different sizes and different brands. And this is the Stampin' Up! Version. And I also have this little one. And a lot of the card making projects, it's fine for. This bigger one is it will handle 12 by 12 paper. So if you're, you know, that's more for if you're doing scrapbooking or larger projects. But if you're just doing card stuff, this is the one I use the most. The cool thing about this one is it has this extra plate. So this is the regular side, and it just has lines going one direction. You can kind of see, it's basically like the grooves of the trimmer, but it doesn't, there's no blade. And then it has a diagonal. So you can more easily do diagonal patterns as well with this. And this one comes with a ball stylus tool. And you can even mark, it has these little markers where you can mark certain, if you're working on a project and you want to, you know, remember where you're going, you can move this little marker wherever for your project. So, so that's pretty cool option. But for most things, I can use this one. And it has the measurements there, and I've even marked a couple things for projects that I use it for. But it has the guides. It comes with this little bone folder tool with it, but you can use a ball. If you prefer the ball, you can use that as well. And works the same way as the paper trimmer, except for that it's a little easier because it has all of these guides ready to go. So it's a lot faster to do your project. Let's say I want to do every 1/4 inch. So you can see it's just a lot quicker. And I don't have to go every, you know, I can do as many or as few as I want. I could make it look like, you know, beadboard or anything. But basically it does, you know, the straight lines. One side is going to be embossed and then the other side debossed. So you can decide what you want. And you can also go both ways. So let's say on this side, maybe I want there to be lines going the opposite way, but I want them to be going in. So you can see how quick and easy. So some of them are embossed and some of them going this way are debossed. So you can have a lot of fun with different patterns with this. And then of course with this one, I could go in and create more of a plaid. So the thing that's cool about this one is I would be able to do a diagonal pattern. So if I was trying to make a plaid kind of pattern, it would just make it easier. Now I could do diagonal on this as well. I would just have to make sure I lined up, you know, I lined it up, and it's a little bit tricky. So it just is a little bit easier way to get a diagonal pattern when you have the plate. Okay. Now let's say you don't have those fancy tools to make it easier, but you want to make a straight line and you don't even have a paper trimmer. Let's say all you ever did was use a bone folder or a ball tool, or maybe you didn't even have those. If you have some foam, just some regular craft foam, or even, you know, some kind of soft surface. I could even do this on my silicone mat. It's got a little bit of cushion to it. And then you have a ruler. I could try to line things up as best I can. I can mark it, you know, if I want it exactly. And then I can use a the ball tool. Now in this case, I'm going to try the smaller one first, because it might be easier with a smaller tool to show up as opposed to the bigger ball, but I can make straight lines with that just using a soft surface. Do it on this. I just have this rubber mat. It's kind of like the material for making cards. Now these are small mats, so that, you know, I have to do smaller designs with them, but if you have a bigger surface area, like on my silicone mat, I can still do that on there too. As long as I have something underneath it that can push into, I can create that effect. So if you don't have all those fancy tools, you can still make your straight lines and still create your ice cream cone. It's just a little bit extra work. I mean, some measuring maybe or things like that, but it works fine. Okay. Then you can also use these with a stencil. So my light tool will allow me to see through the paper. I'm just trying to do winter stuff because, you know, I'm trying to get my winter cards made. So let's say I want to do this ginger man guy. So I can take my ball stylus, and all I have to do is, I'm going to line up my paper, and I would probably even suggest taping it down, just, you know, to keep it. But since I'm just demonstrating, I'm not going to. So you have your stencil and then your paper on top, and then just just trace the inside of that with your ball stylus. All I did was trace that, and now I have, oops, I have an embossed gingerbread man. It's debossed on this side and embossed on this side. So any stencil will work. You can even use your die cuts, which when I talk about die cuts, I can show you that. But anything that can work as a stencil, basically you can use it to create some embossing. And for these, I would use the ball stylus. I would not use the bone folder, because the bone folder, you could try the bone folder, but I think the bone folder is designed more to go in a straight line, because it has a little bit of a flat pattern, and the ball is a little bit easier to work around the corners. Now you can try other things too. If you don't have a ball tool, or you don't have any of the, you know, bone folder, any of that, you could even just try other things that you have. You don't want it to be too sharp. This is kind of square and actually makes an interesting square type pattern. So this one actually creates kind of, I don't know if you guys can see that. It's kind of a square-ish shape. It's not coming, not picking up real good on the, get more, I think more light's not helping. But anyway, you could try that. You could try an orange stick. Let's see. I don't know if that's going to poke the paper. Let me just try with this. See if you can see it a little bit better. As long as you don't push too hard, I feel like, yeah, so that works. I also have this darning needle. That's kind of shaped almost like a stylus. Just be careful not to poke yourself with the sharp part. So that also would work. So you can kind of find things around the house that might work as a stylus if you don't have any of these tools. And you can buy some cheap crafting foam and you can be all set. Or you can use some of these other shortcuts that I'm going to be showing. Let's get to some other fun shortcuts. Now, those are simple designs. You pretty much, I mean, you could probably with the ball stylus and the foam create other designs as well. Like you could do a flower, right? You can just hand draw a flower. So, you know, you could create your own patterns. You can write words. You can do all sorts of things. But with the next tool that I'm going to show you, this is just leveling up. But it does require tools. Let's start with some embossing stuff. This tool does both embossing and die cuts. And there's a lot of variations of tools out there. There's even electric ones that automatically feed everything in, so you don't have to do it all physically. But this is the one I have. So this is what I'm going to show. And then there's also the one that actually is electric that cuts the shapes out for you. And I'm not showing that one either, even though I do have one of those electric die cutting machines. But basically this is this by Sizzix. This is the big kick, and it comes with this plate that I need more space. It comes with this plate that has different pages. So depending on how much thickness you need, it has diagrams of which thing you use with which level of thickness, because basically what it is a press. You're pushing it through and it's pressing it down really hard enough to achieve the results that you're looking for. And depending on the thickness of the project you're using is going to dictate the thickness of the block that you need to go through there. So it comes with that. And then you can also buy separately this magnetic platform. And this one's designed for the framelits. There's other names for these edgelets. There's different, you know, there's different proprietary names for these thinlets, framelits, whatever, but they're basically die cuts that are these thin metallic, and they fit on this, and this has a magnet that they stick to. So this is a separate thing. But what also comes with this, I think it comes with this, I assume it comes as a set, are these acrylic plates. These are part of a sandwich that you make. And you can see they're well used. All of those are little cuts that happen because you're basically, this is acting as your cutting board with the dies, with the die cuts. So you usually use 2 of them and you create a sandwich of whatever your project is, and then it gets fed through this machine. This has nothing in it, but that's basically how it works. Okay, the things that you can use in here include embossing folders. And how embossing folders work is it's basically a folder, and on one side it's an innie and the other side it's an outie. So these, let me see if I can, so this part of the design sticks out, it protrudes from the folder, it's hard to see. And then this part of the design, which matches up with the other side, goes in to basically sandwich the paper, and it pushes the paper into this shape. This side pushes the paper into this shape. There are a lot of different techniques you can do with this, but the basic technique is just to put paper in, and I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that now. Actually, let me do it with the craft paper. It might show up a little bit better. So you just put your paper inside, making sure that, you know, the design that you want, this paper's smaller, so it's not going to take the whole design, but just making sure that the parts of the design that you want are covered. And then you want to close it and hold it still. And then in this case, I want to find the correct page, which is, I think it's the second one. Yeah. So if I look on this sheet, it shows me these embossing folders. So I only need one of these shims. So this is basically just to make it a little thicker than without. I wish that these were separate pieces, because when you open this up, it becomes this really long. They don't want you to lose them, but honestly, trying to fit it in this space is a little bit tricky. Okay, so here we go. So I'm going to take the bottom of the sandwich, bottom plate. I'm going to put in my emboss folder, and then I'm going to put the top piece of the sandwich, top bread. And it doesn't matter if this whole thing is straight, as long as the paper stays straight inside there. That's the biggest thing for the design. And then now I can just feed it through. And I usually run it once one way, and then I go back the other way. I can hear snap, crackle, pop as it is manipulating the paper. Now, sometimes, especially in drier environments, or if your paper's older or it's more brittle, you can wet the paper first to make it so it doesn't crack. Sometimes, especially if it's like a really strong embossing, it may make the paper crack. So if you do find that you're getting cracking or anything like that, you can try just moistening just a little bit of a spritz on both sides of the paper, and that'll help it to not crack. So I get the deboss on that side, and then on this side, the emboss. And you can see with this paper, it almost makes it look a bit lighter where it is embossed. And I could use either side of that. So you can see how this is a huge shortcut. If I was trying to create this with doing my hand embossing, something like this design would take me hours, and I can run it through here and it's like, 2 seconds. So I could just stick that on right on a card and I'm done. Or I can even do some other stamping and inking and embossing techniques that I will be showing in the near future. So that's basically the simple basic embossing folder. And there are so many designs out there, from even sentiments, thank you cards. I mean, it just makes it go very, very quickly. Now, another way you can get embossing, but it's a little bit different, are these texture plates or embossing plates, and they're one-sided. So they only have a design. The design is the negative design of whatever the pattern is. And with these types of plates, you add a cushion that basically allows the paper to push into those openings. So this is just almost like a mouse pad. It's kind of like a little rubber pad that will add the pressure to get the paper to push into those grooves. And you have to have, of course, the right sandwiching, you know, the right sandwich level. So I'm looking here, this is texture. So now I know it's telling me all of the steps that I need for this paper. It's just it's really nice how it gives you all of the steps right on there. All I need to do is take the texture. So I'm going to take my texture page. And then the blue sheet is the paper. So I'm going to use, I think I'll use that, craft because I think that shows up better on the camera. So I'm putting my paper in. And then it tells me to put the silicone pad. So I'm putting that in. And then it says to put in the impressions pad. And it comes with this extra. So this kit has this in it. And it tells you exactly what you're supposed to put in together. So I have all of my parts of my sandwich. So hopefully all I have to do is then run it in. And it should. Now, if you ever have a problem, you can always, you know, make your own thickness if it's not working. You can use a shim or something like that to create your own sandwich. So if this didn't work, or if I didn't get the level of embossing that I wanted, I could just add some cardstock as a shim. Okay, so now let's see what we have. And voila, we have a really cool texture on that page. So that's another type of plate or something that you will find out there. Now, those are both more the embossing, but you could also, if you have something that's the right size, let's see. Oh, let's do this. Okay, so this is thinner and it's just a stencil, but it has some texture. So why not try it? Why not give it a try? So I'm going to follow along with most of these, except for I'm probably going to need a little bit thicker. I'm probably going to need it to be a little bit thicker, but I'm going to put my stencil down. Then I'm going to put my paper down. Then I'm going to put the silicone mat down. And then I'm going to put, I think I'm actually going to just put, try putting this extra plate down just because I know it's going to be too thin. And I'm going to see if that'll work. It might be too thick now, but let's just see what happens. Experiment. Now the thing with this is the stencil has to be small enough, but look, now I have my stencil turned into embossing texture page. So you can really make your anything that's got a design on it go pretty far if you play around with this. And again, I'll be demonstrating even more ways to do. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about is dies. And basically what a die cut is it's a cutout piece of paper in this case, using a die cut pattern, and they look different. So I want to show you a couple different designs you might see. This is the older style. Back in the day, now I don't know if you'll even find these anymore, to be honest, but basically there's a blade inside there. It's embedded in this foam, and when this is pressed down, that blade comes out and cuts the paper. And in this case, it's some deer. So I'm going to go ahead and just demonstrate that. And this was one of the earlier designs. I don't need this thick block because it's got all the thickness in it. So I can basically just use it with just these plates. I'm not going to get the full design because I don't have the big enough paper here, but basically I'm putting my paper where I want the design. So I don't know if you guys can see, there are 2 deer in there, and I'm going to capture this one that's primarily this one that's flying reindeer. Okay. And for good measure, you can kind of hear a click when it cuts through the paper. For good measure, I'm just going to go back the other way, because sometimes it doesn't always cut the first time. And then voila, you have your little deer die. So just an easy way to quickly, you don't have to do all that fussy cutting with those scissors. You can just pop it in and get a cool die cut out of it. These take up a lot of space, as you can see, just they're bulky. So over the years, they've come up with, you know, if they've gotten smaller and smaller. They have this style, which so far I have not, I haven't had a lot of success. Sometimes it's hit or miss with this, but I'm gonna give it a try. Sometimes what I'll have is it doesn't cut all the way through, and I don't know if you guys can see the pattern. I really wanted to use this design. If you can see, it's a little swirls. I wanted to use it to create a antlers for my deer. So let's see if we can make that work. This one has that style here. So that's the right size. And then it should be pretty snug. If it's not very snug, then it's probably not right. Because, you know, it's basically you're trying to press it. So again, they do have these electric versions. So they'll just feed it right in. Okay, this one did work. So look at those cool designs. I think those would be really nice for deer antlers, don't you think? So I can make a fun deer antler out of those. So you can, and if you have to cut it out of thinner paper, what you can do is cut several of them, glue them together, and make a thicker version of it. So you can always thicken them up. In fact, I like to do that with sentiments just to make them a little bit firmer. And then you can also add embossing on top of them, like the heat embossing. So you can always find ways to thicken them up if you need to. But I created this card, and remember when I was removing the tape and I tore some of the paper around it? It's hard to see, but what I can do now is I can maybe hide some of that by creating this is a little thinlit version, and I'll show you how compact that is. This is the die cut for this one that I created this with, and it not only gives me a cool die cut, but also it does some embossing or debossing, as the case may be here. So I don't know if you can see that texture. So it has these little grooves that are designed to only emboss or deboss, I should say, not cut. So it has the blades on these big areas, and then it has texture. So you'll see a lot of the die cuts, like these thinlets, these thin framelets, whatever the proprietary name is for the ones that you get. This one is this is a Stampin' Up version. And these ones are framelets, but you'll see a lot of them that have that too. They might add some stitching or some different effects. So they're really cool. They don't take up a lot of space. And how I store them is I buy these magnet sheets. They're adhesive on one side and then they're magnets on the other, but they're pretty firm in and of themselves. So I can either glue them onto I can glue them. I can actually peel off the adhesive and stick them onto cardstock and cut them down, and I just store them in the folders on the magnets. And so I can actually start like this. So that way they're not like all crammed together. I can see them easily. And then I just put them in either the packaging that they came with, if they have nice packaging, or I buy those little folders that I make them. So those are pretty handy, and it's a fun design that I can use. And then I can also add on top of it a punch. Now, punches are basically another way to do die cuts, except for they just punch the pattern out. So let me go ahead and show you. And you can see this takes up a lot of space too. So that's why the framelits and the other machine, I mean, that's become so popular. But punches are just, they're quick and easy. You don't have to have the machine, but they take up space in their own right. And essentially you can see where the punch is going to be from the bottom. Sometimes they'll have a little bit of a reservoir under there that'll catch the pieces, and then you just press down and it creates your design. In this case, I get 2 snowflakes. So what I'll do is I'll punch a bunch of snowflakes, and then I just have a container full of punched snowflakes ready to go. But I can add that to my little project here. I could add, a little snowflake or a few snowflakes if I wanted, just to maybe, distract from that, from the torn paper or whatever. Like I said, with this frame, it's not very obvious. There are various punch designs as well. And okay, I think this is this is also a punch. So that's a cute little card design. All right, I think I've covered all of the different things. We're at 8:47. So as you can see, I just really covered the tip of the iceberg. Each of these techniques has so many different effects and things that you can do with them. So each week I'm going to dive deeper. Next week I'm going to start with the heat embossing or the wet techniques, and then I'll move into more of the embossing folders, because we're going to add inks and heat embossing. We're going to combine a lot of these together, and I'm going to just show you how much you can do with each of them individually and joining them all together. All right, so we started with heat embossing. We did the heat embossing, and you can see hopefully you can see how it's shiny. And then this is also heat embossing. This is clear on a white pigment ink, which is a great effect for, like, in the distance, stars or something. But then the white embossing powder on the black was much brighter. And then we did the textured or embossing paste, and I mixed that with some glitter and made some cool, and that's through a stencil. And then we did the scoring, which is just the straight lines. And those are some projects you can make with that. Now this is adding the ink, and of course when you add the ink, depending on the way you do it, you can try to just get the ink on the raised areas. Some of this, because this ink pad's really soft, it went into the inside too, but there's ways around that. And then this is more scoring and more scoring, which is harder to see, but just the various ways that you can do scoring and the effects that you can get. And then using the ball stylus with a stencil on a light box, or you could do it on a window. And then the embossing folder, the texture plate or embossing plate, using a stencil as a texture plate, and then the die cutting, This was a die, and this was a punch and a punch. And again, you could use this, you could use the cutout. You can even use this, as long as it's cardstock, you could use that as the stencil and use the ball stylus around it. So, you know, there's just a lot you can do with even just a few patterns. If you have one pattern here and one pattern there, I mean, I could use this as a stencil and create a pattern of a window from using the die. I could use that ball stylus around it and create that shape as well. So there's a lot of things that you can, there's double duties, you know, you can make with a lot of these things. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Healing Art After Hours. Again, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, interact as much as possible to help support this channel if you find this content helpful. And as always, happy creating. Bye.